Hello Xeno fans, I'm Scott, and today is the end video that I've promised. I've wanted to make this video for quite some time. I've had some time to stew my thoughts after that finale, especially with how I ended up being on the money with Alvis being involved from my very first theory. Future Deemed was probably the greatest gaming experience of my life, and with its release, the complete Xenoblade 3 package was probably cemented as the greatest game that I've played, at least in my estimation. There's a lot to talk about, and I have plenty of ideas for other topics and character analysis, but today I figured I'd hone in on one of the best characters in the series, N, and go into detail as to how the DLC has dramatically enhanced what is there, and how it works in tandem with the information that we could have already extrapolated from the main game. I wanted to have this video out around the start of the year, but with the announcement of the art book, and the promise of new information, it had to be significantly postponed. I had several predictions, and they ended up being validated with the advent of said book. I was on the money with basically everything, and that went on to very substantially alter the trajectory of this video. So prepare for spoilers pertaining to the whole Xenoblade narrative, and including that book. In Future Redeemed, we come to understand that the line of N's reasoning about the world follows all the way back through to the beginning of his actions. As we observe in Xenoblade 3, N's character is centered around lies. This is true both in the past and in the present of the story. A series of lies that he believes to justify his actions in line of thought in order to anchor himself in his fragile sanity. With Future Redeemed in tow, it's now possible to trace the entire line of lies that he believes and purports from chronological start to finish, and examine then how N is a character that embodies the will of Mobius, that being the will of stagnation, in a perfected form. This then runs counter to the fate that Destiny would have in store for his counterpart, Noah, who would become the Endbringer. To take it from the beginning, the very first lie, the lie that Gondor and then Matthew especially tore apart, was the notion that his destruction of the city was justified on the basis of protecting Ionios. It's worth noting that he did not state it, but he allowed that implication to linger in the air. In the flashback, Alpha and N fight, and you play as Niall for this moment. This is to reinforce within the player's mind the idea of protecting the people from the threat that N and Mobius represent, if only to make you side with Alpha, if even just for a single second. You were protecting people. And this contrasts with N, who, in his mind, is protecting the world. Or rather, that is what he's saying to himself in order to not be consumed by the weight of the sins that he is currently committing, and will continue to commit from here onwards. The lie here is clear to everyone. The only true hero that day was Gondor. Gondor successfully shattered the illusion of N's justification by asking how Mia would feel, that she would never follow this line of reasoning. And then, with the last embers of his life's fading flame, Gondor made his last stand. His old heart broken by the revelation of what his father had become, he resolves to protect the memory of the fifth Noah, his father, by protecting Niall. Wielding the wild, untamed power of Ouroboros, he was capable of freeing A, or rather Alvis, from Alpha in his dying moments. A's freedom would set the stage for the first victory, which would carve the path to a future redeemed. When pressed for an answer as to why did he do this? And did Mio know? N could do nothing but grit his teeth, hold his tears, and declare in somber tone, "The burden is mine alone to bear." In this moment, N is attempting to steel himself in the face of this terror. This scenario is nothing short of a nightmare. It is said that when one becomes Mobius, the memories of all of their alternative selves become one, and that dreams one had of life in Ionios then embody the memories of lives one had lived before. But unlike the memories of his past selves which haunted him, pushing him to walk this road, today was no mere dream. This nightmare was reality. His blade now resting in the chest of his own boy, in much the same way that these actions will, in a matter of mere moments, place a dagger into Mio's heart. To Noahs of ages past, this scenario would represent the worst outcome imaginable. But he stands here now, paying the entrance fee Z devised to walk this road. Destroy your past selves, fully and totally. Their legacy in the city, in Gondor, in Niall, the memories of heroes once called Ouroboros, and even in Matthew. N is cutting away that which is most precious to him. It's only then, at the bottom of despair, can one be truly reborn as Mobius. This road will be difficult, beyond words, unquestionably so, and it was indeed a lonely road. But the lie here is a simple one. This is a path walked alone, because he could not face the reality of a life without Meow. What he says to Gondor is a lie, because Noah of ages past had always walked alongside their respective allies. In this age, Matthew exists, and he is the proof of this. The city is the living proof of the unity of the previous generations of Ouroboros and what they had once experienced. Even as the heroes and legends of the worlds of Xenoblade 1 and 2 had faded into myth, their true meanings and histories being misunderstood, and developing new identities within this new land, Ionios was still a place that saw new heroes and allies rising up to oppose the conflict of the current era. And as we are aware, they will continue to do so for a millennia. As this continues, they will, slowly but surely, whittle away at the control Mobius claims over all of creation. Ionios' stillness was humanity's will. It would then take the will of the humans that followed to overcome the will of the past. With all of this in mind, it's self-evident. Ends was not a path that needed to be walked alone. It became one, however, because he could not see that reality. He looked at his current failures, and was literally shown the failures of his past selves, judging them to be the proof needed to justify his conclusion that resistance to Mobius was futile. He could not bring his power to its apex. He was incapable of wielding the sword of the end to its full potential, for its true purpose, to strike down Z and the Endless Now alongside it. Doing so now would never work, his will having been broken, and so it became a self-fulfilling prophecy of defeat. His path was a lonely one, a path chosen out of desperation and self-interest, one in which he had already grown to regret mere moments following his ascension. His first mission was to destroy the city, breathe life into Mio, destroy everything once held dearly, following his given orders. In this moment, he is the one who makes this a burden that he would alone bear. Not Z, not Mio, not Alpha, nor Gondor, and not even the world itself, filled edge to bleeding edge with tragedy. End's next lie, then, is that he believed was immediately shown in Future Redeemed, and shown fully in the main game. Mio, now M, as per Z's promise, confronts him. In this scene, N once again justifies his actions, saying that he did it for her. So soon after his first sin, Gondor's last actions forced N to think. He was forced to face the reality that with or without Alpha, nothing would justify the atrocities committed on this day. He fails to mention Alpha to Mio because it was nothing more than an excuse. His hand in this, actively attempting to strike down those he had once called family, was unforgivable, and more importantly, inexcusable. To the woman he loved, there was nothing he could say to her that would make her feel the same way for him again. Think back to how seldom it is that we see N and M together in the base game before the grand reveal. They were apart. Noah had achieved his goal of ensuring an eternity for her, but it was not one in which she found herself a willing participant alongside him. We are never once shown their Mobius transformations, let alone their interlink. The power of interlink, once having served as the definitive proof of their connection, we are then to infer that that link had been severed and never reforged until a millennia had passed. When he declares that he did it for her, the light in his eyes has already faded away. He had already internalized her justified fury. He speaks a half-truth. He did do it, at least in part, for her. However, this did not represent the full reality of his actions that day. He did it for himself, because he could not bear to be taken away from her, because he lacked the conviction necessary to place his soul into this conflict. Alpha was an excuse then, and it totally failed to hold water. And he knew that to be true even before thinking of making the attempt. There was no love left to salvage, no lies that could be spun beautifully. There was only regret, and the whole truth of that day. A whole truth that he would continue to fail to internalize throughout the total duration of his eternity. He'd do everything to save it off, but eventually, inevitably, the truth will set him free. End's next lie comes when it is time for Matthew and the others to face Alpha for the first time. This time, he declares that the source of his strength comes from that of his resolve, that his emotion and that his fury have tempered and honed, and that it is the reason that he is stronger than Alpha. This is also a lie, and we come to understand why in the final battle of Future Redeemed. The truth of the matter is that End's godlike strength is in truth sourced from his status as the next heir to the divine power of the Logos core of the Trinity, therefore making him the Endbringer. He then would be the next driver of Malos, one of the Trinity processors who govern the very existence of the world. It's clear from the cinematic framing and the implication of Rex's words that the Logos core existed within the Sword of the End, much the same way that the Pneuma Core then existed within the Blade's counterpart, the Fists of the End. The sheer irony of this being that the title of Endbringer is meant to be inherited by one who seeks destruction. End's actions, however, are that of the preserver of stagnancy. Through his role in Alpha's defeat, and then subsequently falling in line with Mobius, he had become the guardian of the Endless Now, embodying a corrupted vision of Pneuma's one-time role and will. The Sword of the End is quite literal. It's a sword whose purpose is to bring about the end. It's the end of an entire world. No doubt the desire Malos holds to end this false world, to be the end of this cycle. But because of the lives that Noah had lived, because of his love for Mio, and because of his inability to let go, he could never truly become the Endbringer. He could never defeat Z. End's refusal to accept his role in this world is what will in turn lead to the seventh Noah's inheritance of this role, despite him wielding the power of Pneuma as well as Fiora in the Sword of Origin. End's strength is not that of his resolve. It is his regret. It was the regret losing generation over generation that allowed Noah and Mia to exist outside of the flow. They persisted far beyond Homecoming. And as Ionios is a world governed by emotion in the very literal sense, it allowed them to surpass the system of the world. Yet despite this, despite the supreme advantage that they had possessed, his power never reached its apex. He could not manifest Logos' core in the final battle with Alpha in the manner in which Matthew had for Pneuma. Malos' core didn't appear in that battle because End had forsaken the path set out for him. End himself perhaps may not even truly realize it. But as he barks of his strength, he is lying at this very moment. He can only keep up with Alpha due to his strength as Mobius and the divine blade he wields. The poorly wielded, blunted power of destruction. The next lie, it would come on Prison Island, at the apex of the world. After being shown the full picture of that day, Matthew would press N, only for him to imply that Gondor's death was his choice. N is unable to even say what he means directly at this moment, leaving it merely at an implication, but one that was understood clearly, as even he doesn't believe it. Matthew makes it clear. That's not what he meant. Matthew once again tears apart N's notion of his actions in the city being justified. That his inability to see Gondor's wish wasn't for this was tantamount to stupidity. The fact being that his actions, seeking to kill his granddaughter Niall for the so-called greater good, was nonsense, which he had made up to ignore facing the reality of the evil in his actions. Naturally, he is guided to this conclusion by Z, who would, in 1,000 years, describe these and similar actions as preserving the endless now which you dream of. Plausible deniability vanished instantly when he had the audacity to imply that death was Gondor's choice. The opposite is true. His actions left his son with no other choice but to make his last stand. N gazes skyward, unable to face his descendant head-on. At this moment, he knows it's a lie, and allows himself to be struck by Matthew in this moment, because it's at this point that any veil of innocence vanished to everyone, including himself. His words lacked the bravado and regrets that characterized his typical charade. His sins laid bare, but those illusions in his mind are all that remain. It's also worth noting that M is not in the endgame of Future Redeemed. From that it's clear, before their 1,000-year nightmare had even truly begun, she already refuses to stand beside him. He needed to lie to ground his sanity. What he needed was Mia, but she would not stand behind him in this effort. In a millennia, he will decry the power of Ouroboros, but faced with the impending end of the world, N is once again made a hypocrite. It is in fact his choice that allows the full power of Interlink to awaken. He could not become the Endbringer, but he could allow Matthew to become the Preserver. The final battle of Future Redeemed is also the final reunion of the siblings of the Trinity. And this is the reason why it is that we see the past battle prior to this. It's because to understand the present, we must first see where this story began long ago. It was the Trinity that began this tale, and it has now come time for the Trinity story to at long last reach its ultimate climax. The battle to redeem the future was fought hard, and after everything, Alpha, or rather Ontos, was still standing. N, then, was the one who made the decision that unleashed the power that would, in due time, upset the established order. He is made a hypocrite in the future by opposing the very power he unleashed. As he would one day say, he had no other choice. that he needed to become Mobius in the same way in order for him to preserve the endless now. He was again left with no other choice but to become the one who would plant the seed that would in due time destroy him. He was willing to use the power of Ouroboros when it benefited his ambition, and yet would become to loathe and oppose it when it ran counter to those very ambitions. As N is incapable of reaching his predestined path, his will forces the destroyer, Malos, to express preservation. That desire matches Matthew's current will, who has inherited Numa's strength and resolve. This unity and agreement was then what was needed to overcome Alpha, as Ontos is based off of the input of its other parts. Now that those parts agree to preserve the now, albeit for vastly different individual reasons, Alpha is left with no other choice but to relent. And after the smoke is cleared, N's most logical action as a Mobius would then be to strike down Matthew, who at this point is the mightiest non-Mobius warrior in all of Ionios, and the largest threat to the Endless Now that still existed. They do ponder the concept of fighting, but N, for the first time, chooses mercy, because working together destroyed Alpha and freed Ionios from its threat. In a sense, he is once again made a hypocrite. He claimed that the burden was solely on him, but through cooperation, he had overcome this threat. Matthew was ultimately the one who made him realize that Alpha was nothing more than a sideshow in the face of his unforgivable sin, and that nothing would ever truly justify it. And this was the first massive crack in the facade, and in response to that mask's failure, N will now begin his 1,000-year contemplation, and in the intervening time, he will use countless means and angles to rationalize his actions, rather than facing the truth. Matthew's final words to N, they were, as an Endbringer of the past would once say, like a curse. Malos once spoke of how some words can hold incredible power, a curse which keeps one tied down. It's interesting then how Alpha would be cursed by his counterpart, how Alpha would fall before A and their allies. N, in much the same way as Alpha, would one day fall at the hand of his own counterpart, both having unknowingly been freed from their alternative selves by the will of Ouroboros. Gondor's final actions having freed A, and Matthew's final actions in Origin having unknowingly freed Noah. This curse, the curse of Matthew, would, much like an Ouroboros, loop around one day. And this then recontextualizes everything. All of N's actions can be understood as we examine them under the microscope of Matthew's words to him. When we pick up with N again chronologically, in a fashion that is worth examining at least, 1,000 years have come and gone. N is seen beside his fellow Mobius. They orchestrate a plan to lure the current generation of Ouroboros into a trap. But that isn't the reason that N is doing this. His desire is to show the Queen something. Melia, who had long ago been captured by Mobius, stored within Origin and then replaced with the Simulacrum. We learn at the end of the game that Melia was capable of observing events through this machine, meaning that N's intention to show Melia how hope dies was the most direct way of opposing her that he still could. Across the gulf of time, his objective in another life was to defeat Z and to save her. Through Ouroboros, he had embodied hope. The city's hope to save the Queen. The hope of those who had opposed the Mobius wish. And even if only vicariously, the Queen's and other remnants of the prior world's hopes of seeing their lives and homes restored. He is then shortly made a hypocrite. When Ouroboros arrives, and he has them where he wants them, rather than being forward about his intention, to see them destroyed with an eye shot of Melia, that being the true Melia, he plays into Mobius's facade of the illegitimate rule of the people of Keves, toying with the parts of their inability to understand anything that is actually going on. He states that it is no verdict, but rather the world's will. Funny then, given that he now faces himself, and much like he did long ago, embodied the wish for a world's rebirth. Ouroboros then inevitably overcomes the Queen, and it's implied by N that this was Melia's will. That he failed to even somewhat shift the needle, because as it turns out, Melia hadn't lost hope in the entire millennia-long duration of this nightmare. From the beginning, she had opposed them, and to her last, she would oppose them in mind, body, and spirit in whatever way she still could. Though she was imprisoned, though she was stripped of her birthright to govern the peoples of Bionis, and even as she was forced to sit idly by as people she knew and cared for, like Shulk and Riku, endured and fought off this disaster for ages, her hope remained radiant. What hope could N possibly have of overcoming this sheer determination? In this moment, she embodies the will that he had forsaken, and the holes in the hypocrisy he now faced. Melia had no choice, and yet she resisted. Why couldn't he too do the same? He insists that it's the passage of fate at play, stating that none have escaped this flow. He had just previously toyed with Ouroboros for their lack of insight, and now he is the one expressing a true lack of insight. Melia and the other heroes of Bionis had long ago overcome the passage of fate. He doesn't even realize what he's saying in this moment, that he's made a liar by the same person whom he had tried to hurt. He goes on to state, after the interference, that the passage of fate had slipped from his grasp. N counters him by asking him what he'd do even if he had caught up with it. He goes on to state, after the interference, that the passage of fate had slipped from his grasp. M counters him by asking him what he'd even do if he caught what he was trying to achieve. Responding, as expected, by declaring that he'd create an eternity for the both of them. Yet he is oblivious. Oblivious in this moment to the deep pain that he has caused her, both on account of her own despair boiling to the point of her contemplation of her own suicide, and due to the reconciliation of how N was no longer the man that she had once loved. This shows that he is still believing that personal lie, that he was doing it for her, failing to internalize his own hand in the matter. One could think of this final interaction as M checking her answer, much like her father did long ago. At this point, she already has the key to the Cloud Keep. She knows that the Endless Now can be overcome, and she has already seen this new generation of Ouroboros. By asking him what he wants to do concerning this, she effectively asks him, one final time, if eternity is truly and really what he wants. Naturally, after spending a millennia with a man that she had grown to resent in some fashion, she knew what he was going to say even prior to him stating it. Be it out of the last remnants of her love for him, or out of a blind hope, perhaps representing the little bit of Ouroboros that still rested within her. Regardless, she'd see for one last time his intention, and then she would begin the starting steps of her own grand plan. A plan to free them both. Moving on to the next encounter. A prison break has gone to proverbial hell. An insanely dangerous gamble on the part of Ouroboros now faces its consequences. N and Noah come face to face once again, and after a brief battle with M, N steps in, and he dismantles Ouroboros with ease, because he believes himself superior. Matthew's final curse had come to pass, and he now stood before them. He comes face to face with Noah, the light that exists within the will to destroy, and the spitting image of himself, who still sought the end of eternity. After eons, N had come to believe himself to be the better of all of his past selves. This lie then informs his actions. In this moment, he should be capable of killing all of Ouroboros, for good and with ease. This is because at this moment, the seventh Noah has not yet fully embraced the will to destroy. He has not yet found his own monada, so to say. N, on the other hand, possessed strength existing in higher caliber, but he fails to do the deed. He revels in the moment, savoring his perceived victory and tormenting his foes. This hubris sets the stage for a potentially fatal mistake. Senna and Lance actively attempted self-sacrifice in order to destroy him, coming mere moments from pulling it off. They do it after having reached the end of their respective journeys, seeing the value that their lives may represent when faced with a foe this tremendous, taking solace in the time that this will buy for the other members of their team, and the damage that this will do to Mobius should it succeed. It's in this instance, it's not Noah who has surpassed himself, and it's not even people who are on the radar. Senna and Lance are, in this moment, undertaking action which definitively places them above N, much like the heroes of previous generations of Ouroboros had long ago. The lie is then left shattered once again, and he hates this. When he is saved by X, rather than finishing the job, he comes up with the most demented resolution to this situation that is possible. As in this moment, if even only subconsciously, he has realized that Ouroboros' resolve is at least somewhat his equal. They represent a clear existential threat to him and to his Endless Now. And so the sideshow begins. The sideshow, of course, is not for Ouroboros. They have already proven themselves. Rather, it is for him. In the prison, Noah and the others reach all of their respective lowest points, but N pays special care to torment Noah the most. And this is because he doesn't just want Noah to fail on account of his status as Mobius. He needs Noah to fail and crumble, because he is the living proof of Matthew's curse, and the path that he was unable to walk personified. Who knows? Maybe it'll even be you. He makes the choice to isolate Mio from the group, and specifically comes to talk with Noah, because he is pushing desperately to make his other self reach that same point. The same point that he had reached in Z's theater 1,000 years ago. The point at which hope crumbles, faith dies, and a false solace in eternity is taken. When N laughs, watching from the outside of the cell, there is no joy in his chuckles. N thinks that his counterpart is locked away and doomed to fail, while he walks free. But the opposite is true. Noah is still unshackled from despair, even as he faces the brink. And N is not only bound to the Endless now, but has in fact become Z's most loyal, most useful slave. N is not in fact free, and neither is Noah truly imprisoned. It's as Riku would later say, there was a cold, dead sadness in his eyes. N knows that if his sideshow should fail, that he would have to face the truth. The same truth that N had fought off processing for eons. His laughs are hollow, laughing at the irony of the situation. A millennia ago, he was himself subjected to a similar series of circumstances, and he broke. It's funny then, in a way, that he is now the one that would seek to break himself. It's clear that over his 1,000-year contemplation, self-hatred has begun to seep in, and he takes every opportunity in this moment to exercise said hatred against his counterpart, or rather, himself. He needs Noah to break, because if he does not, that will mean that he has been bested, that the path that he chose would be invalid, therefore invalidating yet another path of logic and lies that he had shrouded himself in, and totally unwinding, proving all of his actions up to this point wrong. Noah falls to his lowest point ever in the eclipse. Mio's declarations to him the night prior in the cell were too much to bear. He loves her far too much for him to let go. He is on the verge of total collapse. And although Riku, a practical father to the boy, does his best, he cannot bring himself to deny what it is that he wants. And so, N throws the flute down to him, a symbol of the rights the seventh Noah's life had taken up. The Offseer's way is to see off life, to let it go. If Noah were able to, in this moment, play that flute and see off the one that he loved, it would be his moment of triumph, as it would represent the moment in which Noah had definitively and unquestionably surpassed N, now and forever, proving himself capable of letting go, whereas N could never. But faced with the overwhelming trauma and the reality of a permanent death, his grip on the flute, which he had briefly contemplated playing, falls loose, the flute falling on the ground. Noah, too, wishes for eternity, if even only for a single moment, and N has bested him. Mio fades into the ether, and N has nothing to offer his counterpart but death. No words, no bravado, no declaration of victory. Rather, a quick and merciless end to his twisted hypothesis. N's theory that when placed in the exact same circumstances he once endured, he would once again choose eternity. It was proven correct, and therefore, there is nothing left to say. The blade comes down, and a miracle would play out. N's journey comes to its logical endpoint when Ouroboros bites its tail. The final lies that N believed that anchored him were that he had done what he did for Mio's sake. Mio would then show Noah the truth to this matter. Throughout time, and throughout their 6 prior lives, Noah's actions were consistent in that he was distinctly capable of selfishness. His love for Mio was true, unquestionably, but he craved life. He opposed Z in some lives for the sake of her. He ran away from his responsibility in another life for her, and he became Mobius for her. Or so that's what one would think. But it's as Mio put it, Noahs of ages past only truly cared about themselves. Noah's prior selves wished for life with Mio, for the gratification and escape from the tragedy that it would bring. And in doing so, he misunderstood the fundamental concepts of love. To truly love another is to struggle, to contend, and to endure pain together. To share the burden and lick one another's wounds. To truly love is to meet tragedy at the end of a long road, and rather than falling into despair, find a sense of gratitude and the happiness that is shared. To love is to make the nightmares that plague a continued life worth enduring. Love is, in that respect, a dancing partner with tragedy. To love is to say goodbye one day and patiently await the day that you may see them again, and born and existing in this cycle of violence, in this cruel world that has afforded them so little time to live, laugh, love, and learn. Noah couldn't possibly understand. How could he possibly? How could anyone in this circumstance possibly learn. In this life that we all share, we are afforded roughly just north of 70 years to make a life and learn all that we can. In Ionios, a brutally short 10 years is the standard. 10 years isn't sufficient, so the only option then is to seek the alternative, which is eternity. It's the only choice one can make in this circumstance, to stave off the absurdity of it all. But that comes with its own sacrifices, such as Mobius's insanity, and the pain that N and M carry. To him, love represented the escape from conflict, rather than the unity of two people. Save for the fifth Noah and Mia, who raised Gondor. They were all unable or unwilling to give everything to this cause, because of the fear of loss. With only 10 years to exist, to make a mark, suddenly, everything's a gamble. In 70 years, you can leave a mark, no matter how small, and in doing so, you can make peace with your own mortality. It's the same fate of all people, but with only so much time in Ionios. Every single second counts. And N understood that when faced with that question in that theater so long ago. Throughout the visions, Noah could understand the truth about his past self, that he had fallen into despair and never recovered, because of this world's system and because of its cruelty. And so he made the selfish decision, the only decision that he could. The decision that would hurt them both. The one person that N had assumed that he did this all for, Mia, or rather M, had her heart broken beyond repair in this process. She loved him, but she also understood that she was the basis for the sole lie left remaining with any level of vindication. A lie that needed to be destroyed in order for N to finally see the truth. And so the plan was crafted. M gave her very life to Mia, praying that it would reach him. That the contradiction being made plain even to the one who had loved him once would shatter the illusion once and for all. She didn't want forever. She just wanted to live one full life and to hear him call her Mia once again. The light returns to the sky above as Mia walks forward towards Noah and slowly understands what has happened, inch by inch, in horror. When the full pictures become clear, he breaks down like a madman. Noah opposing him. That was expected. After all, he hated himself. But surely, he had proven himself to be the superior in this exact moment. His lie was the truth, or so he had thought. The one he walked this long path with had in fact been against him. For eons, his anchor was her, and the lie that she represented. Surely, it needed to be a trick. Surely, it couldn't be that she had fallen away from him. And so, in rage and in pain, he declared Noah his long shadow, lies evident to everyone but himself. For it was him that was shadowed. He declares that Mia was his, another lie evident to everyone. And then he exclaims that Noah had taken her away from him, that he'd have to reset it all to nothing. The truth of this matter being, it was that he had been the one to do that. He was the one who took the choices away from her. He couldn't even begin to understand the depths of her despair. She had suffered so greatly because of him. To become Mobius was for her to betray all that she is. Her mother, the Queen of Agnes, whom had opposed the Endless Now since the day it began. Her father, a hero to this realm, who had given up everything, including his remaining time, entrusting it to the future generations, of which Mia was a part. Her life in Ionios, tied with the red thread to Noah, with whom that they had left a life behind. Her past, tied in with those who had done everything they could to resist Mobius. Becoming Mobius, then, was a betrayal of her past family, of her current existence and love for Noah, and of her future, removing her ability to choose otherwise, betraying the wish which her father, Rex, had left behind for her, and the countless sacrifices that the city had made. She had fallen so far into despair, Mia once even contemplating the means with which to end her own life, to escape this cruel fate. It was all him. He was the one who had driven her away. He was the one who had dragged her that far down. The tremendous battle complete, he is defeated. Noah was capable of embracing the role of the Endbringer with the assistance of Mia. He draws from his core the Sword of Origin, paired with the Gauntlet, which no doubt contains Numa's core, and the blade which contains Fiora's origin metal. Noah currently wields the might of two borderline divine beings. Though their original purpose was preservation, it's through Noah's newfound will that he now understands what must be done. He must become the Endbringer, much like how long ago N's will would force Logos' power to preserve. Noah's will now forces Numa's power to destroy. It would be by Noah and Mio number 7's hands that the tale of Ionios would come to a close. When Noah goes to strike him down, he declares his realization that for life to progress, that this world must end, and N exclaims yet another lie. He had already apparently tried to oppose Z, in past lives, perhaps. But N had become by far his most loyal, most powerful soldier, an engine of stagnation. He had totally forsaken the path set out for him by his blade, by Malos. Noah was able to swap this away and declare nonsense with the utmost ease. Not even N believed it when he declared that Mobius was the pinnacle of life, as he lay defeated. Mobius, the pinnacle of life? As if. They are among the most fragile beings in all of existence. Dying once, a permanent death. All of his lies failed to hold any weight, both to those around him and to himself. This facade shattering, cracking the logic and reason he had once used to justify himself and his actions. N is forced to face the reality that his beliefs were lies. But Z comes to him, telling him to go, using his most powerful soldier to protect the collective desire of humanity. He offers N no comfort, no recourse, simply an order. But before we get to this, I feel that now is the appropriate time to talk about another actor on this stage. One that is in plain sight, yet is hidden all the same. The greatest supporting actor in the whole play. The actor on that stage, of course, being Malos. Malos, or rather Logos, exists within the Sword of the End. This is no mere implication any longer. The writer of our series has informed us of such, and apart from delaying this video significantly, this revelation then calls for meaningful analysis. We are all wondering how, an answer that is no doubt bound to be extrapolated upon in the future, but I think I at least have the reason for why, what the deeper meaning is, and why this is significant. And that is that N is simply the next of Malos' string of failed and would-be drivers. Malos is an Aegis, taking that name after he destroyed an artifact of significance, declaring himself to be of divine importance, and given the power of his sibling, Ontos, divinity is a fair declaration to make. Mithra, Alvis, and Malos show us the three paths that a blade and driver can take. Mithra, showing us what unity and bonds can achieve when driver and blade work together in mind and body. Alvis, showing us what happens when a driver pursues solely their own self-interests, thinking of them as only an accessory. Malos, then, is a representation of what occurs when the driver is simply not suited for the blade. And I would argue that he never had one that did. Malos was a slave to the corruption that his first driver, Amalthus, had caused him. He became the Endbringer, destroying and punishing the world for the pain and stagnation that the people of the world faced. An extension of Amalthus' will, expressed in resonance. But a time would come when he would forsake Amalthus. Seeing that Amalthus was half-hearted, he hated the world, its people, and its sins. But he lacked the will needed to engage in wanton havoc and destruction, thereby initiating the Aegis War. At that time, Malos was like a child, talking of his ambition with grandiosity and bravado. This would come crashing down during the climax of that war, when Malos brought Mithra to her lowest point, and when Malos found himself on the receiving end of decimation. What Malos needed following his survival was to learn, to heal, and to grow. His counterpart in this tragedy, Mithra, would take this transformation to a literal extreme. Her desire to no longer exist after her mistakes were laid bare were so potent, were so damaging, that her core gave her exactly what she wanted, much like how Noah would, in time, break away from N and his despair. But damaged as he was, Malos could not experience that same blessing, and his next would-be driver, though closer to him than Amalthus could ever conceive of being, wasn't the one who would stem the tide for him. And I am of course referring to Jin. Jin is never outright stated to be Malos' current driver, but it's as he says,
I exist for his benefit. That's all I'm gonna say.
In the time that follows, Malos and Jin would plan their grand plan. Jin had lost everything in the Aegis War and its fallout. Everything. The light of his life, his comrades, his home. All reduced to ashes in the fires of war. Brought to despair, he gave into the darkness. He would be the one who would personally see to it this world's punishment. Punishment for the pain that he endured. Punishment for the system this world was created under and its many contradictions. And punishment to those whom he felt had wronged him. He was once a kind and gentle man, but that kindness died with Torna. A gentleman is brought down to walking the path of hatred, and so he makes the only choice that he can make, siding with his one-time enemy in Malos, seeing to it that all Rest's sins are not forgotten nor forgiven. Malos found his childishness and bravado tempered by his new partner. A contradiction, surely, and one that he would never forget. All that remained was the mission that led to Destiny's crossroads at the apex of the world. Jin achieved his ambitions, and in the intervening time had developed some remorse that came out in his final moments of life. He entrusted Rex with a mission to make Malos see the light that he had glimpsed for but a moment. With nothing left, Rex and Malos would face one another, both having gotten the answers they longed for. Two opposing visions for the world, hope and despair. And pressed for answers, Malos lays bare what he feels.
But that man, he'd lost everything. He no longer wanted anything. He didn't even want to live anymore. And despite that, his life was the one thing he hadn't lost. Because he couldn't!
The thought of you forgetting me, it's like one heart is being ripped in two.
Words can be a curse. That curse must be kept and tied down here. A wretched tale, isn't it? This whole world is a wretched place.
Do not forget that you too are a part of that world. If it were not for you, for Amalthus, both Jin and Laura's lives may have taken quite different paths.
Exactly. That's exactly it. You've gotten smarter with age, huh? I'm a wretched being, too. A hideous monster, far beyond saving! So, let's end this now.
He acknowledged, fully, the contradiction. Jin's pain, and all Rest's blood-stained history, was the source of this crusade. But despite everything, Malos acknowledged his own guilt in this. Jin took Malos' companionship, the companionship of the one key figure who had wronged him, over total despair and loneliness. Throughout Xenoblade 2, Jin displayed a clear feeling of superiority to mankind. Why is it that Bladekind suffers, and humanity are left as the masters, when blades hold the power, when blades live forever, and humans are so fragile and fleeting in their existence? A contradiction put into place by the architect, and one that he needed to tear down. What Rex states to him, then, is that despite the imbalance of power, humans and blades were not fundamentally dissimilar. Jin's own journey proved Rex's point firm. Over the long and painful road that Jin was forced to walk, he faced the same enemy that all of mankind faces one day. The eternal and mortal enemy of all life, loneliness. Walking the path of hatred, Jin himself fell prey to the same predator that all of mankind does. Without the ones that he loved, he was left alone, barely clinging to life, due to the words that cursed him, what Laura said to him in her final moments. He could not bear to live life alone, and so, faced with the potential for a meaningful connection, Jin would make the sole choice that a man in his position still could. He allowed Malos into his life, and this is in spite of the contradiction that founded this relationship, that being Malos' own hand in Jin's profound suffering. And that contradiction destroyed Malos' very soul. And it is that very same contradiction that prevented Jin from becoming the Endbringer. Humanity and Bladekind weren't so different after all. Jin achieved his mission of vengeance and left it all to Rex. Unfortunately, Malos wasn't there when Jin finally earned his rest. He never heard the words that Rex said to him, and nor did he hear the words that Jin had returned. And so, the only path that remained to atone was to fulfill his driver's life's mission. All that remained was guilt, and the mission. He would give the world Jin's punishment if it were the last thing that he were to achieve, and it was his duty to his partner, his leader, his friend, and his driver. In his life's fading moments, a tremendous battle completed, Rex declares that he wishes that things were different, that he was his driver, that Malos could have experienced hope instead of despair. Malos reflects on his life for a moment, that there was only one driver for him, or so he would think. He would give his sister a moment to reflect before facing oblivion, but total oblivion did not come to him that day. For some reason that we can't yet fully explain, Malos remained. He would find his core incorporated into the Sword of the End. Origin metal contains the memories, emotions, and ideas that make up certain concepts. The memory of Malos is not something that can be so easily forgotten. A scar, and all rests long and blood-stained history. But the time at long last comes for history to move forward, and by some divine machinations, or perhaps irony, Malos would again find himself in the hands of a new would-be driver. Noah, a young boy, who would stop at nothing to escape the cycle he finds himself within. Together, they ought to have been the ones to bring this world to its end. For the very, very first time, the destruction that is inherent to Malos' nature is exactly what is needed. Z, then, can be thought of as everything that Malos resents. To preserve the status quo for eternity, to never learn from history, and to never meaningfully progress. Growth is preceded by destruction. To achieve progress, you must first upset the established order. In that respect, there can be light within destruction. And after centuries of a tormented existence, it's easy to say that the time should have come for Malos to be able to contribute to the world, contributing something more than pain and bloodshed. Jin's final moments, followed by Rex's light, showed him, if even briefly, that there was a path forward, even for him. That he was not a monster far from saving, as he thought himself to be. His new driver was the ideal then, as much of Rex's light could be found within Noah. They both held hope in their hearts. It could have been perfect, if not for the cruelty inherent to Ionios. And so the cycle begins. Noah is born into the flow, he receives the Sword of the End, he finds Mio, they go on a journey together. They then become allies who would oppose the Endless Now. In that journey, they fall in love. Some lifetimes pan out differently than others, but all ending with the same inevitable result. Noah is separated from the ones he loves, and he fails at the end of the nightmare, falling just short every single time. No doubt, Z is aware of the threat that he would pose. Z knows full well what that blade truly is. Alpha is as a god compared to himself. The Sword of the End, then, is one of the only pieces on Ionios' vast board that poses a genuine threat to him. And recognizing that threat, he sees to it the grand plan. The truth of the matter is that Noah was only so much like Rex. Rex could be brought to the cliff edge with a sheer drop leading towards despair, and his will would only shake, never breaking entirely. His friends were there to keep him on the path when things got too hard. In that way, they were different. Noah was different because when faced with a sheer drop, he would give in to despair if he lost Mio. He fell into the pit, and he never climbed back out. Z gave him a choice that day. To us in the audience, it only looks like a sole option, and in fact it appeared that way to Noah too. But another road rested before him, just barely out of sight. On the day of his ascension, the destruction of the city, Noah, now reborn as En, abandoned the shared destiny that he and Malos had, and once again, in a tragic twist of fate, Malos would find himself without a driver who could do for him what Rex had done for Pyra and Mithra. He physically died that day in Elysium, but his spirit and his memory persisted, the path left untaken, seemingly sealing Ionios' fate. The Logos core, or rather Malos, would not appear in the showdown with Alpha, because even if he wielded the blade, commanding even a sliver of that godlike power, he could not become the driver, nor the man that Malos needed him to be. And so En would be given his eternity. Malos, no doubt an unwilling participant in this, powerless to do anything to oppose this. All he could do was sit and wait, hoping that something, one day, might change. One could even argue that this is his punishment. For the sins that Malos had committed in life, he now faced an eternity of stagnation on the other side of his existence. The opposite of his very nature. A purgatory, where his power goes misused by a man, much like Jin, who had lost everything, unable to do anything. But whereas Jin was aware of the contradictions in his actions and his hate, it's also worth noting that even as he stared down the void, Jin never did wish for eternity. En differed still, holding on to that picture of himself as the one in the right. to the very end. N would take up the blade again, and he would meet them again in Origin, blustering that his woman was at Noah's arm, something everyone can tell is nonsense by now. And so they have it, their final battle in Origin. In this moment, he faces you not as Mobius N, the user interface of the game simply dubbing him N. He is N. It is all he is now. Without Mio, without eternity, Mobius no longer holds any meaning. He faces Noah not out of a duty to represent the collective wish, but out of a solemn duty to himself and to his pride, to defeat his counterpart, and to maintain the illusion that his path was the correct one, no matter the cost. He is bested, because at this point, he had already begun to waver, and had done so since the eclipse. His feelings, his resolve, and his power. Cracks in the armor emerged that day, and that follows the massive crack that Matthew had made an eon ago, and no amount of brooding or additional false lies could patch that grisly wound. He tries desperately. One more final lie. That it was Noah who, in that moment, was the one who failed to protect Mio again. Once again, a lie that is evident to everyone, including himself. The eclipse was initiated by him, and it was his actions, not lucky Noah number 7, that pushed her to this. He desperately refuses to accept, until at last M faces him and dispels the final lie that Noah had taken her. She still loved him in some fashion. She just couldn't face him as he had become. The destruction of the facade meant the inevitability of questioning. He begged to know why, and it's described as what it is. Dumb luck. Noah rationalizes this journey as dumb luck. After all, in Z's endless world, everyone can be a winner one day, given the time. But that too is a lie, one not even spun by N. As Noah needed N, he needed someone to test him in the manner in which he had. Because of the eclipse, Noah faced the fact that he was capable of wishing for the endless now, if brought to a certain point, which then set him up so that he would not repeat this mistake. When Noah was made to face his mentor, Chris, he was capable of facing down Chris's criticisms of the acts that Ouroboros had taken. And when Chris fell, he would, with tears in his eyes, perform the off-seer's duty, seeing off his dear friend and mentor, Chris. In that moment, Noah finally accepted his role in its totality, and truly inherited the title of Endbringer. This acceptance sets the stage for the endgame. Ouroboros go to Origin, which then in turn led to the destined encounter. The player was once led to believe that N was an alternative, separate entity to Noah. The truth is that they are not. This lie is washed away by their reunification. N returns to Noah, with no more lies to anchor himself by, and an eternity of regrets at his back. He accepts the warmth of Noah's light, of the light that existed on the other side of this road long, long ago. N had at long last returned to himself. What's clear from all of this is that N was held back by his doubts in the face of Z's overwhelming control over reality. His regrets in the form of his sins that he had committed, and his fears in how seeing this mission to its completion would inevitably separate him from the one that he loves the most. The truth of this matter is that N was the Endbringer that never was. Luck was not on his side, nor was he capable of overcoming his counterpart in Noah, which would have proven the Endless Now to be the right path. This failure, then, is just another in the line of failed Endbringers. Amalthus failed due to fear of the potential that Malos represented. Jin failed due to the contradiction and surrounding beliefs which existed at the very root of his connection to Malos. And N would fail due to his despair and his willingness to take the easier road. By the end of this process, all that remained for N was lies and delusion, all while both M and Malos, the two people that had unwillingly walked alongside him, every step of this long and painful journey, unable to be away from him, were unable to change him, to escape this wretched tale, unable to face his destiny, to be the final heir to the divine powers of an Aegis, to be the final Ouroboros, to have the will to walk towards the future. Noah would be separated from N. Noah then brought Ionios to its inevitable end, because he was capable of overcoming all the things that held his counterpart back, and in doing so, lucky Noah number 7, the final Noah of Ionios, became the true Endbringer. In the final moments of the war with Mobius, N and M again break away from Noah and Mio. They explain that Mobius now exists purely as desire, the desire for eternity personified, Action cannot impact desire, but thought can, and as they are now personified thoughts and memories, they give up themselves to finally be the ones to end this nightmare and eternity forever. For the first time in many, many long years, N is honest. Z had sealed his fate when he elevated Noah and Mio to the position of Mobius, as they were inevitably separated from the passage of fate by their next selves' actions. The light and hope that their new selves embody, then exorcising the many sins that they had committed, as they were now free from the road of providence. They had, for the first time since this nightmare began, the right to choose. They made the choice that should have been made ages ago in that theater. The choice that they were destined to make. The only choice worth making now then was the one that would free them all from this long nightmare. Before N and M can face their destinies together, the sword of the end in tow, Noah declares that N and M can stay there, that they can live in peace at long last. It's a lie. They are still Mobius. They are lingering wishes for eternity made manifest. And though they no longer held that wish, as Noah's light had washed away the darkness in N's heart, some of N still managed to seep out of Noah, even now. As they are still fundamentally one and the same, even in the climax of everything, little traces of Mobius still do persist within our heroes, as we were able to deduce in the final battle with Z Infinity. N, having learned over his long and difficult journey to see through the lies that he himself had continually spun, having grown past the need for the lies, it is N who now denies Noah's hypocrisy, telling himself the truth. They are not worthy of this kindness. Their sins, though now understood and exorcised, are not to be forgiven, much like how Malos was held down to the realm of the living long past his death. The punishment is still yet to come. They would only prove to be unwanted baggage in the new world that is about to be born. And as Mobius, they were doomed from the very start of this process to repair the ruined world. They cannot go forward into the new future that is about to be born. They were born from eternity, and they now will mark eternity's end. Together, they destroy this nightmare forever. The Sword of the End, returning to Origin, leaving Malos' story to continue. Whether he's finally earned his rest, or if an atonement is still left to enact, the future is as of yet unclear. Leaving their new selves to inherit the future that comes thereafter, Noah and Mia, then, are for a time forced apart. Eventually, and inevitably, Noah will, however, see her again. In a world without war, without Mobius, without the Trinity, and without their lingering regrets. They will not wish for forever. Their lives in Ionios having demonstrated the folly of such a hope. The love they forge thereafter won't be plagued by the same lies and regrets. It will be pure, unharmed by despair. Noah and Mio, number 8. They will walk towards the future, hand in hand. I've been the Space King Scott. I'm signing off. Thank you for watching.